a source that we have been given. But my friends, where is our grit? There are no shortcuts. No one is crowned without competing according to the rules, he says about the athlete. Sharing in suffering, absorbing even suffering into yourself is part of the journey. And why would it be any different than a soldier or an athlete or a farmer? Why would it be any different for a follower of Jesus Christ? The famous Olympic athlete Jim Thorpe was no stranger to adversity. Maybe if you've read something about him, you knew that he grew up in the early 1900s as a First Nations American. And Thorpe experienced his share of racism, his share of prejudice, and he also knew loss early in his life. At the age of 9, his twin brother passed away, died. And within a few years, both of his parents also died, and it left him as an orphan. But God blessed Thorpe with at least one special talent, and that was his athletic ability. He was one of the first players to ever play professional baseball and also football at the same time. But maybe you know this story. Perhaps his greatest achievement, his greatest goal, was winning 2 gold medals in the 1912 Summer Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden. Shortly before he was to start the pentathlon, somebody actually stole his shoes. And instead of quitting, instead of giving up, Jim Thorpe went to a trash can and found 2 shoes, but they were 2 different styles. One was, in fact, an athletic shoe, and the other, in fact, was a loafer. Can you imagine? And each shoe was of a different size. And he compensated, and you can see this in the photograph, he actually compensated by adding an extra sock. Because, you see, he was determined to run the race. You see, you don't finish a race unless you, run and start and step out and move forward. Paul says to Timothy, think about this. Some tasks are harder than we can even imagine. And you indeed have been given grace to share in the suffering. That's a part of this calling, this leadership, who you are as a follower of Jesus. That's a part of the grace that we have been given. But Timothy, also this. Where's your grit? Do you have the grit? The determination, the devotion. As he says, think over what I say, for the Lord will give you understanding in all of these things. I think sometimes we even fail to hear Jesus, too, at times on this topic as well. Jesus also knew this kind of dedication and devotion to his own task. We hear the beauty of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those, right? But right at the end of the Beatitudes, there's this line that stands out. Jesus says this to those who are listening. Watch out when everyone speaks well of you. Oh, you mean I'm not necessarily supposed to be nice? Or to please everyone? Jesus. Watch out when everyone speaks well of you. Because you see, Jesus knew that a person who is like that is all over the place. They're going down this rabbit track and that rabbit track. They're going, and their priorities are all over. Is there grit? Is there a single-mindedness to what and who you are? Because even Jesus knew that there would be some who would not understand why he came. There would be those who would even reject him. And there would be those who would follow him. But the thing is that Jesus kept going for everyone to be crucified. was set before him. The Bible says this was his hard task. It was his willingness to share in our suffering. He loved us enough even to risk our disapproval. He loved us enough to bless us through his blood and his sweat and his tears. Amen. Grace and grit. Love and devotion. Blood and sweat. How we respond to difficult tasks and tough decisions and hard conversations says something about who we are and our own character and where we find our courage and our strength. And I am blessed to know many of you who have made some tough decisions. And you have relied on God's strength and courage. And you have stepped out and you have lived, to use the phrase, with grit. Final story. Some of you might recognize the name of Sean Brando. He was the chaplain who knew and who was asked by the Humboldt Broncos to connect with many of the families who had lost or who had had injured sons and players in the tragic bus accident in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. And talk about a difficult task. Really impossible in many ways. And there's days I know, and there's moments where I'm thinking, I gotta go to this meeting, right? And that's a tough task. And I'm sure that he got lots of advice of what to do and what to say. Sometimes when we're in these situations too, we get lots of advice, we get lots of things. People will come to us but they're not dealing with what we're having to deal with. We are the ones that have to move forward, make a decision, deal with that task ourselves. But I think the one thing that he has done well, and he's done very well, was simply to be himself. And in many ways, in humility, to speak the truth and the hope of the Christian faith, not only to these families, but also to this nation. And we need more positive messages like this. When many people, even those who did not hold a Christian worldview, would be listening, how do you deal with something like this? He says that when he was in the hospital and he was visiting the families, he says this. The only part of Psalm 23 that I kept hearing was, even though I walk through the valley of darkness. And in that moment he said, I felt, as a pastor, I felt as if I should have some answers, but there was nothing. There was nothing but my gut-wrenching prayers for these families. But later on, many of these families came back and they just appreciated, let me use this word, this is my word, his grit. He was there. Not with answers, but just present for them. He didn't hand it off to someone else. He didn't delay when he got the phone call. No, he was there. He said, I was broken, but I came with gut-wrenching prayers. And interestingly enough, and maybe you've read it, maybe you've seen it, and it's on YouTube, and please feel free to take a look at it after this message. At the Broncos' first game of the season, he spoke of hope in difficult times and tragic times. But he also spoke of this. He said, my hope is in Jesus because that's where my power, my strength comes from. And it wasn't just to that arena or to those folks who were gathered. That was to a nation. That was over Sportsnet. And interestingly enough, there's been no backlash to that message. The grace of God and your grit together. Courage is grace under fire, as we've heard. My friend, maybe you're here this morning, and maybe you're facing a difficult task. Maybe there is a responsibility that you have been given, a conversation that you know you need to have. And maybe you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed with it all. Well, here's the starting point. Be strong in the grace of Christ Jesus. You are not alone. Let's say that together. Be strong in the grace of Christ Jesus. You are not alone. We have someone who gets it. In Jesus. And maybe you're here this morning and you're in a tough place in your own life. Maybe you're faced with something that you're wondering, do I have the hard skills to deal with this? The promise is this, that God works with those who are brokenhearted. The promise is this, that God cares for those who feel discouraged. And even more, the promise is that God shares in your suffering. So how are you going to respond to that? How am I going to respond to that? Amen. Paul says to his spiritual son, think over what I say, for the Lord will give you understanding in all things. And here's my final line. It relates back to the soldier and to the athlete and to the farmer. And these are biblical metaphors as well. And you will share in the victory, you will share in the crown, and you will share in the harvest. And all God's people said, let's pray. Our good and gracious God, we thank you for your word to us today. And I thank you for Paul's words to Timothy, because we sometimes need to hear them from those who we trust and who care about us in our life. And God, I thank you for your grace in our lives, that it is a place where we can find power, a sense of comfort that we are not alone. But God, also remind us too that we have a calling, and that we are running the race. We are those who are in a battle. We are those who are planting seeds towards your harvest. And sometimes that takes hard work. Sometimes that means a willingness to absorb suffering. It sometimes means a willingness to even allow things to happen in our own lives that are difficult. But God, we thank you that in that process we learn even more how deep your grace is for us. And that we have that hope, that victory, and crown, and that sharing the harvest. We thank you and we praise you. In the name of Christ we pray. And all God's people say.